He wasn't supposed to be in that arena. A boy in a wheelchair. A horse no one could ride. They called it dangerous. They called it impossible. But in that breathless moment as the crowd fell silent and the stallion stood still, something happened. Not a command, not a trick, a connection, one that would change them both forever. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. The fog that clung to the hills of Willow Creek that morning felt unusually heavy, as if the land itself wanted to stay asleep. Autumn had begun to take root, its breath cool and damp, its silence pressing down on the world like a wet wool blanket. The trees around Whispering Pines Ranch stood solemn and still, their leaves dull against the pale sky. This was a quiet place built far enough from the town that the only sounds most mornings were the low whinnies of restless horses and the clank of iron gates. Whispering Pines had long been a sanctuary for the unwanted, the wounded, and the wild. It was a place where ranchers and wranglers worked with patience, not power. But even among their most difficult cases, none had ever arrived quite like Whisper. The trailer door groaned open and Tom Ledbetter stood with arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He was a seasoned wrangler in his late 50s, with the kind of hunched shoulders and battered boots that told a lifetime of working in mud, sweat, and saddle. His beard was the kind that looked accidental scruffy shot through with gray. He had the eyes of a man who'd seen miracles and didn't trust them. Montana boys said he broke 2 handlers, he muttered to no one in particular. Stall 6. Inside the trailer, Whisper stood motionless, except for the faint twitch of his ear. A white stallion, tall and broad, with a thick neck and hooves the size of skillet pans. His coat, a striking snowy sheen, looked almost too clean for a wild animal. His mane hung in long, uneven strands down the side of his neck. But what struck most wasn't his appearance. It was the stillness, not calm, just still. "Won't let a rope near him," Tom said. "He's all fight. But he doesn't scream. He watches, like he's waiting for something to snap." The horse shifted one hind leg, but didn't make a sound. There was no fury, no chaos, just a quiet tension that made even the air feel unsettled. Across town, the Monroe family's silver minivan turned onto a gravel road, windshield wipers brushing away a thin mist. Inside sat Sarah Monroe, mid-40s, tall and lean, with long arms that gripped the steering wheel like she was holding her thoughts in place. Her hair, once rich auburn, had dulled into a dark ash brown, pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. She wore a worn jacket, jeans, and hiking boots that still had traces of mud from the past week's rain. Sarah used to be known for her kindness. She had been the type to remember birthdays, to make soup when a neighbor was sick, to send "just thinking of you" cards. But 9 months ago, everything changed. Her son's climbing accident had hollowed out something inside her. Since then, she had become a woman of action, not softness. Quiet instead of open. Protective, not warm. She moved through her days as if emotion was a luxury she could no longer afford. In the back seat sat her son, Caleb Monroe, 16 years old, thin, pale, and closed off like a shuttered house. His once athletic frame had narrowed, and his shaggy blonde hair hung in loose waves over his forehead. He sat in a wheelchair, hands resting on his lap legs, motionless in jeans that no longer fit quite right. Caleb had once been a force, a championship rider, a rock climber, an unstoppable grin. Now silence followed him like a second shadow. "Almost there," Sarah said softly. Caleb didn't respond. He hadn't said much in months. And when he did, his words felt like echoes from a life he no longer believed belonged to him. They turned into Whispering Pines Ranch. The wooden sign was barely visible in the fog, its paint peeling from years of harsh sun and snow. A young woman in ranch gear approached as they parked. Her name was Emily Hayes, 23, with sunburned freckles and unruly red curls peeking out from under a navy cap. She had the gait of someone who spent more time with animals than people, and a voice trained to sound chipper, whether she meant it or not. "You must be the Monroes." "Welcome to Whispering Pines," she said with a polite smile. "I'll walk you through the place." Sarah returned the smile. Caleb said nothing. As Emily led them through the paddocks, she chatted about the facility, how most horses here had been rescued from rough conditions, how every animal had a story, how healing was a two-way road. Sarah listened. Caleb rolled behind them, his wheelchair's tires crunching over the gravel in rhythm with Emily's boots. Eventually, they arrived at the far end of the barn. "This here's stall 6. Emily said, her tone shifting just slightly. "We just brought him in from Montana. Name's Whisper." Inside the stall, the white stallion stood facing away from them, his bulk filling the space like a stone statue. His coat shimmered faintly even in the shadowy stall. His tail flicked once. His ears did not move. "He's different," Emily admitted. "Aggressive, but not loud, just distant." Sarah nodded, glancing at Caleb. His face remained impassive. "You don't have to go near him," Emily added quickly. "Honestly, we keep most folks back unless they're staff." Caleb didn't speak. He didn't move closer. He simply looked, if you could call it that. His eyes were pointed in the direction of the horse, but whether he was seeing the animal or simply surviving another minute of the day, no one could tell. Whisper remained as he was. No reaction, no step forward, no subtle connection. Just fog, stillness, and a long distance between two lives that had not yet begun to see each other. The following Saturday arrived with a stillness that made the ranch feel even more isolated than usual. The early autumn fog had lifted, replaced by a sky of thin, high clouds and a breeze that carried the sharp scent of pine needles and horse sweat. Whispering Pines Ranch bustled more than usual. It was Showcase Day, a monthly community event meant to highlight the progress of rescue horses in training. Local families, donors, and curious townsfolk from Willow Creek gathered near the main arena, sipping coffee from paper cups and leaning on wooden rails worn smooth from decades of elbows. Caleb Monroe sat near the far edge of the crowd under a canvas canopy that offered some shade from the brightening sun. His wheelchair rested on packed dirt, quiet and out of place among the restless feet of ranch volunteers. He wore the same flannel shirt from the week before, sleeves rolled to his elbows. His expression remained unreadable. His eyes were somewhere else. Sarah stood behind him, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Dressed in her usual jeans and windbreaker, she spoke to no one, her gaze darting across the arena. She didn't belong to the cheerful murmur of neighbors and weekend visitors. Her world was narrowed to a radius of 5 feet, the distance between her and her son. She hadn't expected Caleb to agree to come. When he'd nodded barely, she hadn't asked questions. She had simply driven. In the arena, Emily Hayes, the young ranch hand with the red curls, adjusted the rope around a paint mare's neck and gave a quick wave to the announcer in the booth above. Her voice echoed over the PA system a moment later. "Up next, we've got a bit of a wild card. Some of you may have heard about our new rescue Whisper, big white stallion from Montana. Not exactly approachable." A few people chuckled nervously. Inside the holding pen behind the arena gates, Whisper snorted. Dust kicked up around his hooves. His mane, still knotted and unkempt, clung to his neck like tangled silk. The ranch had refrained from grooming him too much, too dangerous still. Every attempt at haltering him had ended in resistance, not violence exactly, but something colder. He didn't rage. He refused. Tom Ledbetter stood beside the holding gate, arms crossed, observing. His grizzled face was unreadable, but there was something tight about the way his jaw moved when he chewed. "We're not letting him loose," he muttered to a younger wrangler named Jack. Jack was new, tall, wiry, barely 20, with acne still fighting to claim his jawline. "Just a short walk. Get him used to the crowd." The gates opened slowly. Whisper stepped out into the arena, led only by a long lead rope clipped loosely to a temporary halter. Emily held it with the caution of someone holding live wire. The moment the crowd saw him, a hush fell. No music, no announcement, just the striking sight of the white horse, too large and too quiet to feel safe. Whisper's ears flicked back at the noise of the crowd. His nostrils flared. And then, all at once, he pulled away. Not a violent buck, just a sudden twist, powerful and fast. The halter slipped. Emily stumbled, and the stallion bolted to the far side of the arena. Gasps erupted. A child screamed. Several ranchers moved, but Tom barked. Hold raising a hand. Whisper circled once, twice, hooves striking the dirt, his white coat streaked in sweat. He wasn't charging anyone, but his panic was palpable. In the commotion, Caleb moved. No one noticed at first. The audience leaned forward, eyes trained on the horse. But Sarah did. She turned sharply as her son's wheelchair jerked forward down the ramp from the viewing canopy. "Caleb," she said, her voice rising with sudden fear. "What are you doing?" He didn't answer. His hands gripped the wheel rims. He moved down the dirt path and toward the open arena gate. Tom shouted, "Someone stop him!" But it was too late. Caleb's chair slipped between two distracted volunteers and crossed the threshold onto the arena sand. The moment the wheels hit the soft earth, everything changed. The crowd fell into stunned silence. Sarah stood frozen at the edge, her hand over her mouth. Whisper, halfway through another tight circle, stopped. Just stopped. His ears swiveled toward the new presence. His head lifted, mane clinging to the side of his face like mist. For a long second, he simply stared. Caleb didn't move further. He sat in the middle of the arena, breathing shallow, every muscle tight from fear he refused to admit. The wind tugged lightly at his sleeves. He looked at Whisper, not challenging, not pleading, just being. Whisper lowered his head. Not dramatically, not like a horse bowing in some trained spectacle. Just a slow dip of the neck, his gaze steady. He took one step forward, then another. His body no longer bristled with fear. He walked until only a few feet separated him and the boy in the wheelchair. No one spoke. The silence held. Caleb's hands were trembling faintly on the wheel rims, but he didn't back away. He didn't reach out. He simply let the moment happen. Whisper exhaled. The sound was long, warm, like steam rolling from a canyon after a storm. His breath stirred the dust. Tom, still near the gate, removed his hat slowly. "I'll be damned," he said under his breath. The moment stretched thin, then passed. Whisper turned his head, walked a slow circle around Caleb, and then calmly headed back toward the center of the arena. Caleb released the brakes on his chair and rolled himself back toward the exit without a word. No theatrics, no victory. Just a boy and a horse who for a brief moment had chosen not to be afraid. The Monday after the showcase came quietly, as if the town itself didn't want to talk about what had happened 2 days before. The newspapers didn't mention it. Willow Creek wasn't the kind of place where things went viral. But around the ranch, the story moved like wind through tall grass. People whispered. They speculated. Some said it was a miracle. Others called it a fluke. One or two muttered dangerous under their breath. But Caleb said nothing. He returned to Whispering Pines the next day, and the day after that. No one told him to come, but no one stopped him either. Sarah had asked once, just once, if he really wanted to go back, and when he nodded, she simply dropped him off at the gates each morning without another word. He didn't ask for tours, didn't join group activities. He would wheel himself slowly down the gravel paths, past the other horses, past the feed barns and the empty paddocks, until he reached stall 6. Whisper's stall. The white stallion didn't greet him, didn't acknowledge him in any special way. Sometimes he stood in the corner, sometimes he grazed, sometimes he simply lay in the hay ears, twitching lazily. But he didn't run, he didn't react. And for Caleb that was enough. He would park his chair just outside the fence and sit for long stretches, sometimes whispering low thoughts that weren't meant to be heard by anyone, maybe not even the horse. He didn't ask Whisper to come closer, didn't raise a hand or voice. He just stayed. Tom Ledbetter from a distance often observed. He didn't approach, but he watched with the expression of someone seeing something unfold that didn't belong to him. "Let it be," he said once to Emily, who had considered interrupting. "Let the boy have his silence." On the third day someone else began watching too. Her name was Ellie Baxter, 10 years old. She had shoulder-length brown hair with uneven bangs, clearly cut at home, large pale eyes, and the quiet way of someone always listening, even when others thought she wasn't. Ellie had lived in the foster home down the road for the past year, and every Thursday the center sent a van of children to Whispering Pines as part of their therapeutic riding program. Ellie didn't ride. She didn't speak either, not in words at least. Her diagnosis was autism spectrum disorder, moderate to severe. Her file described her as mostly nonverbal and socially avoidant, but that was just paperwork. What the papers didn't say was that Ellie liked to draw. All the time, on walls, napkins, paper plates, her shoes, her arms. If she had something to draw on, she was calm. If she didn't, she wasn't. She always carried a notebook battered and stuffed with so many torn-out pages it had to be bound with 2 rubber bands. On that Thursday, Ellie wandered to the edge of the training paddock and crouched in the grass unnoticed by the volunteers. From where she sat, she could just barely see stall 6, the pale boy in the wheelchair, and the ghost-white horse who never moved quickly. And she began to draw. Her pictures were messy, not bad, just wild, the way wind sketches clouds. She didn't draw people the way other children did. Faces were often smudged eyes, oversized proportions wrong. But the emotion was always there. You could feel something in her lines. That first day she drew Caleb from behind his wheels, his shoulders, the slope of his neck. Next to him she drew Whisper massive and arched like a statue in fog. In her version, the horse's eyes were soft, not wild. She didn't know why. She just drew what she felt. No one noticed her sketches. The volunteers were busy helping other children into saddles, holding reins, giving soft encouragements. Ellie had learned that being quiet gave her freedom. If she didn't talk, didn't demand, she could stay longer where she wanted to be. The next week she came again, same spot, same crouch. She brought more paper this time and crayons. She drew Whisper in motion, galloping through impossible hills, Caleb with wings on his back. She didn't know his name. She just called him the boy who sat still. Back near the stall, Caleb had begun to speak aloud, more often still, just to whisper. Still low, still broken, but his voice carried. "Sometimes I wonder if you're just pretending not to care," he murmured once, watching the stallion flick flies with his tail. "I get that. I used to pretend too." He didn't know anyone was listening. He didn't know that a girl 50 feet away was sketching his posture and trying to guess his thoughts through the angle of his shoulders. One afternoon, Sarah arrived early to pick Caleb up and found him still by the stall. She didn't interrupt. She leaned against the fence a few yards away and watched. Her eyes, usually sharp with tension, softened slightly. She hadn't seen Caleb sit still in months without staring at nothing. Now he was staring at something. Later that night, as Caleb lay in bed, Sarah sat in the living room with her coffee gone cold. She didn't know what was happening, not really, but something had shifted. The boy, who wouldn't speak to anyone, now whispered to a horse. And maybe, just maybe, that was a kind of healing. Back at the ranch, a small pile of Ellie's drawings began to accumulate behind a hay bale she considered her hiding place. No one had found them yet. She didn't want them found. Not yet. She wasn't drawing for praise. She was trying to understand. Her world didn't work like other people's. But somehow the boy and the horse made sense. Whisper never turned his head when she watched. But once, just once, he twitched his ears toward her sketching hand, and Ellie smiled the kind of smile that comes and goes like wind on tall grass. It was a Wednesday morning when the drawings were discovered, though discovered wasn't quite the right word. They had been there the whole time, layered like leaves across the pale yellow walls of Room 7 in Willow Creek Foster Center. But that morning one of the aides came in early with a laundry basket and noticed how little of the original wall paint remained. Ellie Baxter's art had taken over. The room smelled faintly of crayons, paper dust, and cinnamon from a melted candle someone had gifted the home last Christmas. The drawings weren't taped with care, but pinned, layered, overlapped like thoughts in a crowded mind. Horses in motion, horses at rest. A boy in a wheelchair sketched from every angle. The slope of his shoulders, the way he held the wheel rims, his profile when he stared at nothing. One picture, just charcoal on cheap newsprint, showed a pair of hooves and two still wheels under a blue sky. Marla Green. The center's house supervisor stood in the doorway holding the laundry basket like a shield. In her late 50s, with short salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses that slid down her nose every 10 minutes, Marla had worked at the center for nearly 2 decades. She was tall, broad-shouldered, and always wore scrubs with wild animal prints. Today's was a jungle cat theme. Her voice was firm but not unkind, and most kids respected her even if they didn't fully trust her. She looked around the room and sighed. "Ellie," she said gently, "is this what you've been working on instead of the sketchbooks we gave you?" Ellie was sitting cross-legged in the corner, wearing an oversized hoodie with the sleeves chewed ragged and her ever-present notebook open in her lap. She didn't look up, didn't nod or flinch. Her pencil moved swift and light. She was drawing Whisper again today. Mid-step, head turned slightly toward something the viewer couldn't see. Marla walked slowly around the room, not touching the drawings. Her eyes softened. "It's beautiful, honey," she said more to herself than Ellie. "But we're going to need to move some of these before they peel the paint off." Ellie didn't respond. She didn't need to. The drawings had already said everything she couldn't. That afternoon, the center sent a small bundle of Ellie's art to the ranch to show the team what she's been doing. It arrived in a plain manila envelope addressed to Emily Hayes. When Emily opened it behind the tack shed, she found over a dozen drawings, some in crayon, others in ink, and at least 3 done in layered pastel with more emotion than precision. She stood stunned, flipping through the stack. "These are us," she whispered. "That's Caleb." And Whisper. Later that day, Emily left a few of the drawings in the ranch's break room. By morning, they were the talk of the stable. Caleb saw them before breakfast. He'd come in earlier than usual, restless from a night of strange dreams where Whisper wasn't a horse, but a shape made of wind and thunder. He'd wheeled himself quietly into the break room to warm his hands and wait for the day to settle around him, when he saw the first drawing taped to the coffee cabinet right next to the chipped blue mug he always used. It was a charcoal sketch of him from the side, head down, arms resting on his knees. Whisper loomed behind him, still and statuesque, but calm. The shading was all wrong. The lines were uneven. But the mood, soft aching and inexplicably kind, was perfect. Caleb stared at the drawing for several minutes, unaware of how tightly his fingers gripped the armrests. Emily found him there. She offered him a quiet nod and pointed to the others on the table. "They're Ellie's," she said. "You've seen her right, little girl, quiet, always hiding behind the haystacks." Caleb nodded slowly. "She's got something special." Caleb traced a finger along the sketch's edge. "Where does she go?" Emily smiled. "Thursdays, mostly. But she sneaks in whenever she can. She's always drawing you." That afternoon Caleb waited. When the van from the foster center arrived and children began trickling out for their scheduled sessions, Caleb wheeled himself not to stall 6, but toward the paddock near the equipment barn where Ellie usually perched. He didn't approach too close, just near enough to be seen. Ellie, crouched low in the grass, was scribbling on a flattened cereal box when she noticed him. Her eyes flicked up wide, cautious. Caleb raised a hand. Not a wave, just acknowledgement. She blinked. And then, to his surprise, she stood up, walked 3 steps forward, and held out the cereal box drawing. It was rough, drawn in pen and colored with the side of a red crayon. Him and Whisper again. But in this one the wheelchair's wheels were exaggerated, drawn like roses. Caleb took it. "Thanks," he said, voice low. Ellie didn't reply, but she pulled a pencil from her hoodie pocket and held it up. Then she pointed to the grass, gesturing for him to stay. So he did. They sat, the two of them, in the shade of the old water trough. Ellie drew non-stop, flipping pages, sometimes glancing at Caleb, sometimes not. Caleb didn't draw. Not at first, but after 20 minutes of silence he accepted a blunt crayon and began shading in the sky of one of her unfinished pieces. It wasn't much, but it was more than nothing. From across the ranch, Tom watched from the barn doorway. "That girl doesn't talk," he said to Sarah, who had arrived early and was leaning on the fence nearby. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Neither does my son." "Not much." Tom gave a short grunt. "Guess sometimes you don't need words." The Willow Creek Harvest Festival had been held every October for as long as anyone could remember. It was a patchwork of small-town charm, pumpkin pies on folding tables, kids in hay-stuffed scarecrow costumes, and old men judging jams in mason jars. But this year, the centerpiece was different. A new addition on the event flyer had created a buzz from the post office to the hardware store special horse demonstration, featuring the boy and the white stallion. At first Caleb had said no. The idea of standing, or wheeling rather, before hundreds of people made his chest tighten. But it was Tom who approached him after another silent afternoon beside stall 6. The old rancher leaned against the fence arms, crossed his weather-beaten face, unreadable. "They asked for you," Tom had said. "The mayor, the board, even the school superintendent. I don't much care for showmanship, but it'd mean something to this town, and maybe to that horse, too." Caleb had stared down at his lap. "What if it goes wrong?" Tom shrugged. "Then it goes wrong. But maybe it doesn't." 2 days later, Caleb agreed. The night of the festival arrived under a deep blue sky pierced with strings of golden lights and the smoky scent of grilled corn and cinnamon cider. Booths lined the square around the town arena, which had been fitted with fresh sawdust and surrounded by a temporary wood rail. Families leaned over it, chatting, laughing, kids running barefoot through the grass. Sarah stood in the shadows near the back, arms wrapped tightly around herself. She wore a long denim coat and scuffed boots, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. Though her face held the same sharp, tired look it always did, her eyes were different tonight, narrowed not from worry but from sheer restraint. She wanted to stop this. She wanted to run to her son and pull him away from the lights, the noise, the risk. But she didn't. Nearby stood Ellie, clutching her latest sketch pad, which was now bursting at the seams. She wore a mustard-yellow jacket too big for her sleeves, swallowed by her hands. Beside her was Marla, the foster home supervisor, who had never been to a festival in years, but came because Ellie had scribbled C-A-L-E-B in all caps across every margin of her drawings for 2 weeks. "I didn't think she even knew how to spell," Marla whispered, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. In the arena the lights dimmed slightly. The announcer, a round-bellied man with a white cowboy hat and a voice like gravel over a microphone, stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've seen a lot of fine horses in this town, but tonight you're about to witness something none of us expected, a connection that doesn't come from training, but from trust." There was a pause. "And now please welcome to the arena, Caleb Monroe and Whisper." The crowd burst into applause. But when the gates opened, it wasn't a man leading a horse. It was a boy in a wheelchair, rolling himself across the soft earth, steady, measured, and utterly alone. He wore a simple button-down shirt, sleeves rolled, and dark jeans that clung awkwardly to his unused legs. His hair had been trimmed, but not much. His hands, slightly shaking, gripped the wheels. There were no ropes, no bridles, no tools. From the far end a stable door creaked open, and out stepped Whisper. The white stallion walked into the arena with a kind of quiet majesty, his coat almost glowing under the lights. There was no handler, no coaxing, just hooves on sand and a horse who had decided to appear. The crowd fell into hushed awe. Caleb stopped in the center, turned slightly toward the approaching figure. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't raise his hands. Just one breath, one sentence. "We only need to trust each other." It wasn't a command, it wasn't a cue. It was something else, a thread offered in silence. Whisper slowed. He walked calmly to where Caleb waited, his massive frame casting a shadow over the boy. For a heartbeat, they stood still. Then, slowly, deliberately, the white stallion lowered his head, bowing not from training, but from something deeper. The arena erupted. Applause surged like thunder. Children screamed with joy. An old man near the fence wept openly. Ellie, her eyes wide, held up a drawing so fast and fiercely the paper tore. Sarah covered her mouth, overwhelmed by a sudden sharp cry that never quite made it out. But Caleb didn't react to the noise. He was watching Whisper, watching him with quiet eyes and a calm heart, knowing that this moment, this exact stillness, was not about victory. It was about being seen, about not being alone in the middle of a ring of strangers. Whisper stood beside him, head still low. Then, without fuss, he walked a slow circle around the boy, never straying, never turning his back. He stopped again at Caleb's side, calm as dusk. The announcer, his voice shaky now, leaned back into the microphone. I think we've seen enough tonight, don't you?" The crowd roared. But Caleb didn't stay for the curtain call. As the light shifted, he turned his chair and rolled slowly out of the arena. Whisper followed. They exited together the way they had entered, quietly, simply without spectacle. Behind the arena, in the shadows of the hay trucks, Sarah waited, She stepped forward, arms open, but Caleb shook his head gently. Then he surprised her. He reached out and took her hand, just for a moment, just enough. Whisper stood nearby, still and steady. And somewhere in the crowd, Ellie turned to Marla and in the quietest voice she had ever used, whispered, "They're friends now." The glow from the harvest festival dimmed quickly. Within a week, the warmth of applause had cooled, replaced by murmurs that crept through town like a cold draft beneath a closed door. At first it was just a few voices, mostly older horsemen who gathered at Murphy's feed store to talk shop over black coffee and stale donuts. They called it a fluke. They said the horse had been sedated. They said Caleb had no business in the ring, no training, no credentials. One man, Wes Harper, a stout red-faced trainer from the neighboring county who ran a strict roping school, went as far as writing an open letter to the Willow Creek Journal accusing the Whispering Pines Ranch of turning a serious facility into a sideshow. Wes had been around horses for 30 years. He believed in discipline, routine, and riding with a firm hand. He wore stiff jeans and square-toed boots, even in the summer, and he spoke with the absolute confidence of someone who had never been questioned. His letter stirred things up. Other trainers added their voices. Some sent emails to the ranch's board. A few donors withdrew small amounts of funding. But the worst came online. Someone posted a video of the performance to social media. At first it received praise shares and a few local news mentions. But soon the comments darkened. "Obviously pre-trained. That boy's acting. Dangerous precedent for young people with disabilities. This is emotional manipulation, not horsemanship." Caleb didn't read them at first. He didn't even know about the video until Emily brought it up one afternoon gently while they stood by the paddock. "It's gone a bit bigger than we thought," she said. "You okay?" He nodded, but his face was pale. The next day he searched his name online. By evening he was silent again. Sarah noticed the change immediately. She had just begun to feel like something was thawing in her son. Now she saw the same stiffness return to his shoulders, the same avoidance in his eyes. One evening after dinner she found him in the garage, staring at the drawing Ellie had given him, the one with the rose-shaped wheels. "I shouldn't have done it," he said softly. "The performance." Sarah stepped forward slowly. "You didn't do anything wrong. They're saying I made Whisper do it." "That it was staged, was it?" Caleb looked at her. "No, but it doesn't matter. No one believes that." Sarah didn't argue. Instead, she sat beside him on the cold step and placed a hand over his. "It matters to you. It matters to me." But the next morning, he didn't go to the ranch, nor the day after. By the third day, Ellie noticed. She sat by the hay bales, clutching her sketchpad eyes darting between the paddock and the barn. No Caleb, no wheels crunching gravel, no Whisper walking the fence line like he had started doing every morning at 10. Whisper had noticed too. He paced. He snorted more than usual. He refused food from Tom, who muttered, "Damn fool animals gotten picky." Ellie didn't speak. Not to the volunteers, not to Marla, not to Sarah when she stopped by to deliver a casserole to the foster center. But that night when the center was quiet, Ellie walked to the staff office. She stood outside for 10 minutes before knocking. Marla opened the door wearing slippers and a robe with cartoon foxes on it. "Ellie." Ellie held up a sketch. It showed Whisper curled into himself small and dark, while outside his stall stood Caleb fading into the background. The drawing was smudged in the corners from Ellie's fingers, damp and crinkled. "Do you want me to give this to him?" Marla asked. Ellie shook her head. Then, in a voice no one at the center had ever heard, she whispered, "He needs to come back." Marla stared. Ellie looked up, her voice stronger now, but trembling. "Whisper believes in him, and so do I." The next morning, Marla called Sarah. "I don't know what's going on with Caleb, but my girl just gave her first full sentence in over a year, and it was about him." Sarah, holding the phone with one hand and a cold mug of coffee in the other, was silent for a long moment. Then she sighed. "I'll talk to him." Later that day, she knocked gently on her son's bedroom door. The light was off, blinds drawn. Caleb sat at his desk, scrolling through the same cruel comment thread for the 10th time. She sat on the edge of his bed. Ellie spoke, she said, out loud, for the first time since she got to the center. Caleb didn't look at her. She said, "You need to come back. That whisper believes in you." His hand stilled on the mouse. Sarah exhaled. "I know you don't want to be seen, but you already were. And you didn't just help a horse in that arena. You helped a little girl remember her voice." Caleb turned slowly. His eyes, rimmed with fatigue, glistened. "What if they're right? What if I just got lucky? What if I ruin it?" Sarah took a moment before replying. "Then you try again. Not because of them, but because Whisper's still waiting." That afternoon the gravel crunched again. Ellie was sketching by the hay when she heard the wheels. She looked up, eyes wide. Caleb rolled slowly into the ranch yard, his shoulders tense, his breath shallow, but he was there. At the far end, Whisper's ears perked. He snorted, kicked once, and walked straight to the fence. Caleb smiled faintly. Ellie ran forward, holding up a new drawing. It was Caleb standing, not in a wheelchair, drawn impossibly tall. Beside him, Whisper's head was bowed, not in obedience, but in peace. The air at Whispering Pines had changed. It wasn't just the lingering chill of late autumn, or the sharp gold light that streamed through thinning trees. It was in the way the ranch moved, quieter, more thoughtful. The way people paused when they passed Stall 6. The way volunteers smiled at Caleb a little longer now, not out of pity, but something closer to respect. It had been a week since Caleb returned after the storm of criticism, a week since Ellie spoke her first full sentence to anyone. In that time, things had begun to settle not into old patterns, but into something new. That Friday morning, Tom Ledbetter called a meeting in the feed barn. The old wrangler leaned against a haystack, arms folded. His weathered face looked even more tired than usual, but there was a spark in his eyes. "We've been approached," he began, "by the Willow Creek Outreach Foundation. They run a therapy initiative for kids with physical and developmental challenges. Been bringing them out here on Thursdays. Y'all have seen the vans." Everyone nodded. "They want to expand. Start an equine-assisted trust program. More regular sessions, more kids, more time. But they've got one condition." He paused. "They want Whisper involved." A collective murmur rose. A ranch hand named Cody, a tall, easygoing guy in his 20s with a crooked smile and a fondness for chewing toothpicks, whistled low. "You mean the same horse that once kicked a gate clean off its hinges?" Tom didn't blink. "Same one." Emily Hayes, standing near Caleb and Ellie, raised a cautious hand. "Are they sure I mean Whispers? Not like the others?" Tom turned toward Caleb. "That's the point. They've seen the videos. They know what he did in the arena. And they think, hell, I think he's ready for something different. But it's not up to me." He looked at Caleb. The barn went still. Caleb, sitting quietly in his chair, took a long breath. His hands gripped the wheels, then relaxed. Ellie stood next to him, her sketch pad clutched tightly to her chest, her head tilted as if waiting for his answer. He nodded. "I'll do it," he said. "But not alone." His eyes moved to Ellie. "We'll do it together." Tom gave a slow, approving nod. Then let's get to work. The first therapy day was quiet by design, just 3 children carefully chosen. Each had challenges of their own. There was Gabe, a boy of 7 with cerebral palsy, who used a walker and had eyes that sparkled with mischief. Lily, age 9, on the autism spectrum, nonverbal but expressive through hand signs, and Mateo, 10, with a spinal condition that required full-time wheelchair use. The ranch cleared the paddock behind the barn. No ropes, no noise. Just space and soft ground, fresh straw along the fences, and Whisper at the far end, calm and free of halter. Caleb sat in his chair near the middle, Ellie beside him, her sketch pad open on her lap like armor. She'd drawn each of the children ahead of time, giving each a picture as they arrived, a smiling horse and a quiet boy in a wheelchair. No one asked her to, and she said nothing while handing them out. Whisper stepped into the circle as if he already knew. At first the children simply watched. Then Gabe asked, "Can I touch him?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. He looked to Whisper, who stood tall, unflinching. Then he nodded slowly. "He'll come to you when he's ready." Minutes passed. The horse stood still, eyes flicking between the small group and the soft open space around them. Then he moved slow, careful steps. He approached Gabe, paused, then dipped his head gently, allowing the boy to reach out and touch his nose. Gabe laughed, a full, unguarded sound that echoed across the fence line. Next came Lily. She didn't move, didn't speak, but she reached out one hand, palm up. Whisper turned to her inch by inch and touched his muzzle to her fingers. Her eyes went wide, and she dropped her hand, then reached up again. Her fingers brushed his forelock, and she smiled. Mateo was last. He didn't ask, just sat quietly watching the other 2. Whisper turned, started to circle him, then stopped at Caleb's side, waiting. Caleb whispered, "You don't have to. Only if you want to." "But—" Whisper moved. He stepped around Caleb's chair, slow and close, then stopped beside Mateo's. The boy's hand hovered uncertainly in the air before resting lightly on the stallion's neck. No one spoke. No one had to. That was the beginning. In the weeks that followed, the program grew. More children came. Whisper became the quiet center of it all, his presence soothing in ways no one could quite explain. He didn't perform tricks. He didn't need to. He simply was a being of stillness and warmth who didn't demand, didn't flinch, and never judged. Caleb became the unspoken leader. He didn't teach in the traditional sense, but his steadiness anchored the sessions. He showed the kids how to sit still, how to wait, how to breathe. His bond with Whisper remained unchanged, but something deeper was taking shape. Whisper was no longer his alone. The stallion had opened to others. Ellie flourished too. She spoke in whispers, just a few words at a time, but more than before. Her drawings became part of the program. Each child went home with a sketch. No one asked where she learned to read expression so well. Everyone just accepted it. Even Sarah, once so guarded, began helping behind the scenes. She greeted families, managed paperwork, sometimes sat with parents who cried quietly on the porch. Her cool efficiency had softened. She still wore her hair pulled back and her boots laced tight, but now she smiled. More even laughed when Gabe told her he wanted to ride Whisper into battle. At the center of it all was a horse once deemed untameable, a boy who had once lost his voice and a girl who had once lived only in pictures. And somehow together they built something no one expected, a circle where trust didn't have to be taught, only offered. The wind rolled softly across the open pastures of whispering pines, carrying with it the golden scent of hay and late spring blossoms. It had been a year 12 full moons, 4 seasons, countless sunrises, since Caleb Monroe first wheeled himself across the sand of the main arena with a whisper of trust and a white horse at his side. And now, everything had changed. Or maybe it had simply grown. It had simply... The ranch looked the same from a distance. Wooden fences patched in places, weather-worn signs creaking gently, the big red barn still missing a shutter. But something in the air was different, richer, as if the land had learned to breathe again. Caleb moved easily now through the wide gravel paths. His wheelchair was the same, though worn with use. The once tense boy with guarded eyes had grown into a quiet figure of calm authority. He wore a wide-brimmed hat most days, and a navy work shirt with the stitched-on patch that read, "Assistant Trainer," not honorary, official. That morning he rolled past the row of paddocks, greeting each horse with a low, familiar hum. The rhythm of the place matched his breath, now measured, certain, rooted. Whisper trotted silently beside him. No halter, no rope, just presence. The stallion's white coat had dulled to cream in the dust, but his eyes still held the same flame, now tempered, but never tamed. Whisper didn't follow commands. He followed Caleb. Near the southern gate, Ellie Baxter swept the walkway, a blue bandana tied messily over her hair. At 11, she'd grown taller, her frame lean but sturdy. She wore denim overalls covered in chalk stains and carried a notebook that no longer served only as armor. It was now a journal, a schedule planner and a sketchbook combined. She noticed Caleb approaching and grinned, waving the broom like a flag. Gabe finished the water trough, she called. "And Lily wants to paint the fence." Again. "Let her," Caleb replied with a smile. "Just not the horses this time." Ellie smirked and mimed, zipping her lips. A year ago those lips had barely formed words. Now she sometimes talked too much, and no one minded. The children from the therapy program had changed too. Gabe, now 8, no longer needed a walker every step. Lily spoke full sentences in the company of animals, her voice soft but present. Mateo, once silent and withdrawn, was learning to ride, not alone yet, but with Caleb's hand on his shoulder and Whisper walking beside them step for step. Every Thursday the ranch swelled with movement and meaning. Families came early and stayed late. Parents found themselves crying quietly behind the barn while watching their children touch the unthinkable. Sarah watched it all with a quiet pride. She had taken over part of the ranch office work, scheduling, organizing paperwork, filing permits. She still wore her hair tied back, still moved with the purposeful grace of someone who didn't like wasting time. But the sharp edges in her voice had softened. And once a week she stayed after dark, just to sit in silence beneath the string lights and sip warm tea, watching the horses drift in the moonlight. One evening in early summer, as fireflies rose like sparks from the grass, Caleb sat by stall 6, legs folded beneath him. Now he didn't always use the chair. Whisper stood nearby, head lowered, eyes half closed. Ellie arrived with a sketchbook and a mug of cocoa. She sat beside him, shoulder against his. They didn't speak for a while. Then she asked, "Do you remember the first time he bowed?" Caleb nodded. "Felt like falling and flying." Ellie smiled. "I drew it that night. It looked like magic." Caleb looked at her. It was. She flipped open the sketchbook. Inside, new pages bloomed children riding horses, Whisper dozing beneath the apple tree, Sarah laughing with a mug in hand, Tom fixing a fence with 2 little kids holding the nails. And at the center, always Caleb and Whisper, never posed, never grand, just together. "Are you going to hang these in your room?" Caleb asked. Ellie shook her head. "No, I want them in the barn, so everyone can see what home looks like." He didn't reply right away, just reached for her hand and squeezed it once. As twilight deepened, more people joined them. Tom, carrying a crate of tools, dropped it gently by the fence and sat on the steps without a word. Emily arrived with a pie she insisted wasn't store-bought. Gabe came running barefoot to show his latest trick, whistling with 2 fingers, and failed miserably, but laughed anyway. No ceremony, no speeches, just the circle wide and warm and growing. At one point, Whisper stepped into the center of them all and simply stood. It wasn't a gesture or a statement. It was trust, living, breathing, standing in silence. And as the sun dipped behind the ridge, casting long orange rays over the barn, it touched the old sand of the arena and the dust on Caleb's boots and the tip of Whisper's mane, and in some unspoken way it touched their hearts, because they had built something, not a sanctuary, a home. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or fire. Sometimes they come softly on the hooves of a once wild horse, in the quiet courage of a boy in a wheelchair, or in the first whisper of a girl who had forgotten how to speak. This story isn't just about healing wounds. It's about how healing happens not through force, but through trust. Not through power, but through presence. And in those moments of stillness, when hearts begin to open again, we glimpse something greater at work. We believe that God works through the unexpected. Through animals, through children, through brokenness, that becomes a bridge. And perhaps like Caleb, Whisper, and Ellie, each of us is being invited to step into a circle of trust, a place where love does the quiet work of mending what the world has tried to tear apart. So if this story moved, you don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs hope. Comment below with the word Amen if you believe that healing and second chances come from something higher. Subscribe to our channel to follow more stories of courage, kindness, and redemption. And may God bless you wherever you are and walk with you step for step, breath for breath, just as Whisper did.